welcome everybody, and especially welcome to today's speaker, John Bristow. John completed his BSc and MSc in geology at the University of Natal in 1976. He then did a PhD in geochemistry at the University of Cape Town in 1981, and his subject was the geology and origin of the Karoo volcanics, preserved in the Lebombo monocline on the eastern margin of South Africa. After that, he spent 2 years undertaking postdoctoral studies on volcanic deposits and processes in the Western USA at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque. He subsequently pursued a successful career in local and international minerals exploration and mining, and he worked primarily in the diamond sector. He was initially working with De Beers, and then he started his own business and various other mining ventures, which obviously have given him a tremendous amount of experience in all aspects of the subject. John currently resides in Hermanus, which I can testify from personal experience is a fabulous little place near the south coast of South Africa. He lives there with his wife, Marilyn, who's also attending this lecture. Hello, Marilyn. Marilyn accorded me and my colleagues some wonderful hospitality when we visited recently. Thank you again for that, Marilyn. John coordinates the Overberg Geoscientists group, which has just got an absolutely tremendous, it must be world-leading lecture program, which has been just fantastic for people during COVID lockdown, keeping everybody connected and working in geology. And as you might expect, it's such a huge effort, and a wonderful lecture program supported by field trips has resulted in a very big and enthusiastic membership. So the Overberg group in particular is interested in taking geology to the people, outreach as we call it here, in particularly young scientists. And it's a great pleasure to introduce John's talk tonight. The title is Experiences of a Geologist in India. So I'll permit screen sharing and hopefully we can get your slides up, John. Okay.
Okay, sorry about that. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for the introduction, Gillian. Really appreciate the organization of this presentation, and it's nice to meet some of the people that we've heard about from NEGS, which are, I guess, mostly based in the UK and elsewhere. So not to waste any more time, I've had a wonderful career in the diamond space. I've also worked in, as Gillian said, Karoo basalts and large igneous provinces, which was also fun. I was fortunate enough to do my PhD in the Kruger National Park, and one of these days when Julian and her group come back, we aim to go and visit that. But let's get on to India. So I'm going to give you hopefully a sort of fairly light-hearted overview of my experiences in India. It's an amazing place. It's where the diamond business started about 2,000 years ago, and we'll focus a bit on that tonight, but we'll also focus on other aspects of India as well. And you will also get some images of Marilyn along the way. We had a wonderful trip there to an Indian wedding in 2005, which was an experience of a lifetime. Anyway, and this picture is somewhat interesting. It's a picture of our SAA flight that we took to India out of Johannesburg. It was back then, it was a really easy 8-hour flight to Mumbai. And it was an enjoyable daytime flight, and you could see lots of the coastal scenery of parts of Africa in the early stages of the flight, and then you'd get over to India. Sadly, given some of our more recent experiences of corruption and misdeeds of presidents, this flight was, or this South African Airways flight to India was canned courtesy of a corruption process, but we won't go into that tonight. So let's get on with it. So there's on the left the presentation structure. I'll keep more or less to that. I'll remind you where we are along the way. Just in terms of country statistics, most of you people, I'm sure, will be, or most people will be aware of this. Population of India, about 1.4 billion people. One of the countries that, unlike China, and China is decreasing or flattening its population, India is still on the increase. A lot of that population, 35% are urban dwellers. It makes up about 18% of total world population, and the median age is about 28, 29 years. The one very distinct feature of Indian people, they have a very, or generally young population. They are all well educated and very ambitious and hardworking, and we'll see that come out in the discussion in the course of the evening. Down below, the reason I started going to India is it's the center of the diamond manufacturing business. About 95% of all the world's diamonds from wherever they are mined end up being effectively purchased by Indian family businesses and then cut and polished to a very high quality, right down to extremely small sizes. So the picture we're looking at here is a factory in Mumbai. Those are cut and polished goods of what we call smalls and melli, less than 0.2 of a carat or 20 pointers. And if you were to look at the quality of those cuts down a microscope, they are absolutely superb for such tiny pieces of diamond. And then just a little quirk of India, I'm sure some of you have been there, but when it comes to their numerics, they have some interesting counting systems. 1 lakh, just for interest, we won't really go into it tonight, is 100,000, and 1 crore is 10 million. So when they get to big numbers, they tend to revert and refer to lakhs and crores. But this evening, we'll go to Mumbai, we'll then go up to Delhi, Agra, where the amazing monument to Babur's wife is, the Taj Mahal. Go down to Jaipur or the Pink City, and then we'll go and look from a diamond aspect at the Krishna River in Hyderabad. The Krishna River is where most of India's big diamonds came from, going back 2,000 years. Then we'll look at the little Panel mine, a kimberlite called Bunda, which was discovered by Rio Tinto in the early 90s. It'll probably never be developed because of bureaucracy. And then we'll go to Raipur, where we worked on a diamond exploration project, and then back to Mumbai. Okay, so gateway to India. Many of you on the picture on the right, many of you will have seen that. It's very famous from the point of view of people landing in India, and obviously particularly Mumbai. And they have these rather fun sort of transport ferries that run around the coastline adjacent to Mumbai, water transport. Just a bit of history, and this is a very busy table, so I'm not going to dwell on it, but the history of India is fascinating. Obviously, it's stuck up against the rest of Asia. An awful lot of our sort of world history started in Asia, and I've also sent this presentation to Gillian and John, and I think Christine. You're more than welcome to have it. You can pass it around, Gillian, and people, if they're interested, can brush up on this later. Anyway, there's a fascinating history of different cultures, the development of early India and its settlement, particularly in the Indus River Valley, is fascinating. We'll look at some pictures of that. And then it goes through many stages of development, wars, destruction of empires, and rebuilding of empires. Quite interesting in this medieval period. We have the Gupta Empire. The Gupta name has been synonymous with some of our big challenges and corruption issues we had in this country. So it's not a particularly popular name here in South Africa, but anyway, it features quite prominently in the early sort of middle history of India. In 1498, Vasco da Gama discovered a new sea route from Europe to India, and that really began the focus of Europeans and the Brits going across to India to look for spices and all sorts of precious stones. And in the process, of course, that led to the discovery of or the landing at Cape Town along the way. And so some of our Southern African or South African history is also linked into that. The British earliest landings in India was the English East India Company in 1608. And following in that was, of course, the period of the Raj, which took place from about 1858 to 1947. And there's some fascinating history in there. And then we'll finish off with the partition of India in 1947. Okay, but that's really all I'm going to do. But fascinating country, fascinating history. A bit on the religions, languages, the caste system. Many of your people will know about the caste system. It's kind of sort of fading, but certainly when I worked there, it was still quite prominent. And I'll never forget my first trip to India, landed Mumbai, and amongst this sort of mob of people, and you feel absolutely lost. And then we drove into the hotel that we were staying in Mumbai. And at that stage, they have a modern highway system development on the go. But on that trip, you go down this sort of double lane road. It's two sections of double lane, and there's a sewage canal down the middle. And you have a family of caste people who are sort of bottom of the bottom. And typically it would be wife, husband, and a couple of little kids who actually live on the side of that. And they and similar people, every couple of kilometers, you'd see them effectively living on the side of this open sewer, cleaning the sewer. And that's, that's the life that they were almost born into. The different sort of groups would be Jainism. That the Jains are very strong, and you'll see a lot of the Jain population, 2 to 7%, the blue color, live or from the west side of India, and that's really where the diamond business is, either Mumbai or Surat. The Sikhs, Buddhism, Christianity. So those are the main religions. And that table in the middle lower, shows Hindu obviously the biggest religion, Muslims 14%, Christians quite big, mostly at the south of India, lots of Catholics, and then you get the smaller groups, Buddhist, Jains, and others. Languages, 122 major. We thought we had a problem here in South Africa with 9 official languages. Well, there's 122 there, and many other local languages. The most spoken are Hindi, English, and Bengali. And then there's a bit there on the caste system. The geology is not unlike most of the Gondwana continents. And you'll see this picture there on the bottom left-hand side. Effectively, you could be, in parts of the Karpal, Kärnten here in southern Africa, where you have cratons, these ancient cratons, and then you have rift valleys between them. And then, of course, for the people interested in large igneous provinces, you have this very extensive Deccan traps with an age of about 65, 66 million years. And that's also quite famous for the extinction of the dinosaurs. And then across on the right-hand side of that diagram, you'll just see India as it was previously plugged into the supercontinent Gondwana land, and obviously subsequent to this map on the right-hand side, that whole, that Gondwana structure has broken up. So the early breakup of Gondwana was about 180 million years. The rocks I worked on in the Kruger National Park, the Karoo Volcanics of South Africa, and India at that stage moved off with East Antarctica and Australia. And then at 130 million years, we had the breakup of, or South America pulled away from Africa, so West Gondwana land. And then India went skating off into Asia. Just looking at India today, it has moved at a very rapid rate, bulldozing into Asia at something like 9 to 16 centimeters per year. And it's done that in 80 million years or so. So it's and I think we have a number of geophysicists on the program tonight, including Bruce and Gillian as well. And they might have something to say about the consequences of this very fast move of India into Asia. And the picture in the middle there shows effectively what's happening or happened to India and why the Himalaya mountains have formed in the process. So from the left-hand side, you have the big Ganges plain, and that's really the northern part of India. The water and drainage coming off the Himalayas has carried an enormous amount of silt and sediment down into that depression, and it's part of the reason for the early population of India was this very fertile Ganges plain. And on the other side, you've got the Asian plate there expressed as the Tibetan plateau pushing into India effectively and forming the Himalayas. There's a little cartoon on the right, which again shows India in an overall plate tectonic setting. Very interestingly, depending who you read, Everest is supposedly rising still today. Some of the figures make it as high as 50 odd millimeters per year. Others suggest it's lower than that. But technically, if you sort of work on that basis, no climber is yet to reach the top of the world's highest mountain. So just bear that in mind if you're going to climb the Himalayas and expect to conquer the world's highest peak. A bit about the geography. This is a slide, a simplified slide on the left of sort of the geography and topography of India. Like South Africa, you have a plateau, the Deccan Plateau. It's not quite as high as our 1,500 meter high felts, and much higher the Sutu Mountains with their basalts. But it nevertheless does have mountains and higher areas in the center of the country. And then you have this tremendous Indus-Ganges valley up here you can see my cursor in the northern part of India against the Himalayas. And of course, that big basin also stretches down through Pakistan. And it was really this plain, this very fertile ground up in the north that created vegetation, farming areas for initially nomadic people and their cattle to live and expand. And that really led to the early development of India. And very interestingly, if you look at the night shot, a satellite photograph of India at night, you'll see where most of the big civilization or population density of is New Delhi, of course, a huge city, sprawling city. Most of you will be aware of the problems with the smog and pollution, and then you get Lucknow, and then you come down to Kolkata, or what used to be Calcutta. Across on the other side, you'll have Mumbai, Ahmedabad, Hyderabad, and then the other cities down south. So just to see where the concentration of Indian people is, and that goes way back to the settlements on that Indus-Ganges plain. Okay, let's move on to some of the main cities. Delhi is the capital of India. It's a fascinating city, lots of old history. And at the same time, it's also a relatively modern city. But like all cities in India, the people pressure is enormous, and the problems of pollution, smoke, and just too many people becoming more and more challenging. When you look back at the history of Delhi, it's been captured, ransacked, and rebuilt several times, particularly again during the medieval period. Today, it's effectively a dominant trading and commercial center for northern India, and has been for centuries. So you'll see there post-1990s node for international finance and corporate networks. So having said that, Mumbai is really still the economic sort of hub of India, and probably to a lesser extent Calcutta. You have these wonderful big arches and historical buildings. The one great thing about India, unlike us, or unlike Africa, the Indians take great pride in all these old buildings, and there's a tremendous amount of ongoing restoration of any old building. And again, the craftsmanship is quite amazing. A lot of this orange sandstone, yellow sandstone, orange sandstone, comes from Proterozoic sediments about 1,200 million years old in northeast India up in Uttar Pradesh, and they have massive quarries where a lot of the rock for these buildings has come from. And as I said, you know, these ancient artifacts, and here's a very good example, an engineering masterpiece. I won't pretend to pronounce the name. It's Qutb Minar, tall tower, all built by hand. You can see modern maintenance and repair on the go. But if you look at the precision, and bearing in mind back in the days when these monuments and amazing buildings were built, there was no modern laser measuring system. There was no GPS. You know, there were no theodolites, but there, you know, India, you'll see, invented mathematics. So there were really good mathematicians and engineers and artisans who shaped and built these buildings. And as I said, the critical or the fascinating thing for me is the fact that they've all been so well maintained, and they are continually being maintained. Okay, this was probably the highlight of the trip that Marilyn and I had to, well, attend a wedding and then go to the Taj Mahal in 2005. It really is an exquisite ivory white marble mausoleum on the south bank of the Yamuna River in the city of Agra. It was commissioned in 1632 AD by the Emperor Shah Jahan to house the tomb of his favorite wife, Mintam Mahal. And it was completed in 1848, and also houses his tomb today of Shah Jahan. And some of the sort of add-ons took place a few years later. The symmetry of these structures, these towers actually lean slightly outward. If you look carefully, you might see that on this right-hand tower. The reason being, if there was an earthquake or a problem, that the tower would fall outside and not destroy the actual mausoleum in the center. The building material, brick and lime mortar, veneered with red sandstone and marble, and the inlay work is absolutely priceless. And you know, by many, and I think, you know, we would agree with that, considered to be the greatest architectural achievement in the entire range of the Indo-Islamic period and architecture. So this is the Taj Mahal. Very interesting too that the government, and there was a Supreme Court ruling in 1996, have declared an exclusion zone around the Taj Mahal to protect the monument from pollution. And so they have what they call the Taj trapezium zone. In that area, you can no longer burn coke or use coal, equally wood. And the intention was to protect something like 40 protected monuments, including 3 World Heritage Sites: the Taj Mahal, the Agra Fort, and the Fatehpur Sikri, which is another mausoleum. These artwork, or the decor that Marin's looking at, is all made of the most amazing inlays. The section around this mural is all inlaid precious stone, and if you look at it, the finish is absolutely perfect. And this sort of craftsmanship carries on today. So this is sort of the commercial aspect of the craftsmanship. So you can buy a tabletop, which is again that same white marble with these precious stone inlays. You can buy everything from a very small one to a large one. You can buy smaller items like these bowls, and you'll see, the workmanship going on, still using the traditional methods that were used back in the days, the 1600s, when the Taj Mahal was built. Okay, from Jaipur, let's skip, sorry, not Jaipur, from Agra or the Taj Mahal, let's skip across to the Pink City. It's a fascinating place. It's the capital and the largest city in the state of Rajasthan on the northwest side of India. It was founded in 1727. It was one of the earliest planned cities of modern India. It was painted pink by the ruler Sawi Ram Singh I to welcome His Royal Highness Albert Edward, Prince of Wales, in 1876, who subsequently became King Edward VII and Emperor of India. It's a city built sort of down in a big basin, and there are mountains all around it, and it has a wonderful series of forts and walls. You can see this picture on the top right of portion of the wall that surrounds the city. Everything is pink, so you can buy a pinky sari and just about anything else pink that you want. It's also the international home of colored gemstones. So we haven't got to diamonds yet, but it's the home of colored gemstones, which, much like diamonds, tend to be bought up and taken to this international center for cutting or manufacturing precious stones. Those precious stones or semi-precious stones will be amethyst, carnelian, emerald, ruby, tanzanite, garnets, lapis lazuli, sapphire, topaz, and many more. And part of the reason, again, for this gets back to the quality of workmanship that these Indian artisans do in terms of polishing these stones, cutting out the inclusions, optimizing the amount of pure precious stone that they can squeeze out a bit of larger specimens. This just a series of pictures again. On the right top hand side here is again a cutting and polishing room of these people, and you can see again the detail and the cleanliness that they ascribe to. These two guys at the end will be well seasoned and experienced sort of supervisors, and the guys here on the benches will be the people cutting and polishing. And remember here too, the rocks or the specimens you're dealing with are much softer than diamond. So there's quite an art to polishing without grounding away the facets that you want to put on each of these stones. And then, of course, you have the viewing and sales room, and it's always fascinating. I think most of us, who know Indian people or have been there, realize that Indians are great salesmen. Or sales ladies. And so you go into these really wonderfully adorned rooms, as is example here in the pink room down on the bottom right hand side. You'll be given lots of Indian tea and sweet cakes, and then you start your negotiation. And bear in mind here that here you'll have international gemstone buyers coming from all over the world to buy in bulk to take back to, sell in their shops or distribute in America, in the UK, Middle East, and wherever else precious stones are being sold. Okay, let's carry on. So we've been up to the northern part of India, New Delhi. We went across to Agra, which is where the Taj Mahal is, and we've done Jaipur. What we're going to do now is start looking more seriously at the diamond space. So we're going to flip down to the Krishna River in Southeast India, in the state of Andhra Pradesh. There's Mumbai on the far left-hand side where we landed. And so we're going to skip down to this fascinating Krishna River, look at the Golconda Fort, go and look at the Panar diamond mine, and then go to Raipur and then back to Mumbai. Okay, so as I said, the Indian diamond business started 2,000 years ago, and 92 or 95% of the world's diamonds go to India. Last year we mined about 130 million carats of diamonds. A carat is 0.2 of a gram, and a very large proportion of those diamonds go to India for manufacturing. From there, the sort of distribution points will be to, obviously, Europe is still an important place for selling diamonds, and places like Antwerp are still an area for trading some rough and polished goods, but much smaller than it used to be. And then the States, America, is still the world's largest retail seller and distributor of diamonds. America accounts for about 40% of the polished goods, but New York is also famous for cutting and polishing or final polishing of big stones. And when I talk about big stones, I'm talking 30, 50, 100 carats stones in the polished. Anyway, let's go back to the Krishna River. Top left side, there's just lots of small diamonds cut and polished by the Indians. On the right-hand side is an old schematic of a so-called diamond mine. This one is probably a portion of a low-grade kimberlite with all these sort of rather stylistic historical workings, and it looks to have been a fairly vertical structure. But if we go and look at this map, you'll see here, and just focus on the Krishna River, which is a big river. It's not unlike our Vaal and Orange River system here in South Africa. It flows for a very long distance from the mountains or highlands of India in the west. You see all those yellow dots. A lot of those are alluvial deposits, and it ends up going out into the Bay of Bengal. And this Krishna River has produced most of India's very large diamonds. And when I say very large, there's a list here on the right-hand side or lower right-hand side, starting with the Great Mogul. This was in the rough. The figures in the brackets are the rough size of the original diamond, 787 carats. That big diamond was cut into the Great Mogul, 280 carats. The Orloff, 189, and also the very famous Koh-i-Noor, which is also part of the crown jewels in the UK, at 108 carats. And you'll see all of these big stones are plus 100 carats, and then there's a number of 41 carats and bigger. So the first indications of diamonds in India was back in sort of 400 years BC. And the early references to those diamonds is a Sanskrit manuscript. The written language and written culture, it goes back an awful long way in India. And interesting, this was called the Lesson of Prophet, and that makes reference to diamonds. In the year 327 BC, Alexander the Great invaded India and returned to Europe with diamonds from the region. subsequent times, there was a Greek sailor who also observed what he called alluvial deposits adjacent to rivers in India. And that's the earliest reference to diamond mining in European history. And in 1074, the Queen of Hungary had her crown decorated with diamonds. And subsequent to that, interestingly, diamonds were then used in jewelry. So looking at this map, the early years of diamond mining was all around mostly the alluvial deposits of the Krishna River. And then there were some very low-grade kimberlites you see where that arrow is pointing. Actually, there were low-grade kimberlite pipes, and one or two of them were mined by these old-timers. Hyderabad, we'll look at the Golconda Fort. That was a very important Mughal trading center for diamonds. This Wajirakur were low-grade kimberlites, but much like South Africa and Angola, Lesotho, many of these low-grade kimberlites are never economic enough to mine, but they do produce some exceptional large stones. And then there were other odd localities in southern India that produced diamonds. The Panar mine is a small lamprite, much like a kimberlite pipe, that's produced a sort of handful of diamonds, almost a bucket and spade operation for many, many years. And it was mined by NMDC, the National Minerals Development Company of India, who own the Panar mine. But you'll see there's 78,000 carats in the year 2005, a very small production. So that gives you some background on where diamond mining has taken place in India historically. Ironically, if you think of it, India is the biggest manufacturer of diamonds, but it only really has this one tiny little diamond mine producing diamonds. So the Indians are not particularly good miners, but they're wonderful, artisans when it comes to manufacturing and trading diamonds. Raipur's ring, because we'll go and have a look at that. That's where we, an Australian company, and I, together with a colleague here in South Africa, did some work and provided services to that company, and we spent some really fun times in India exploring for diamonds in this area around Raipur, and we actually found some kimberlite. Okay, just give you a few bits and pieces background. So that the Krishna River originates, as I said, on highlands, the Western Ghats near Mahabaleshwar, in the state of Maharashtra, which is the same state that Mumbai is in. So again, this river, like our Orange River in South Africa, sort of flows a long distance across the country. And in that flow regime, if you do pick up, diamonds along the way, those diamonds have become attritioned in the rivers and the river action. And due to that, the very poor quality diamonds are milled out of the system or removed. And it's the big gemstones that survive. That river is about 1,400 kilometers from source to sea. Very interestingly, our Val is 1,120 kilometers. And the Orange River, from its source in Lesotho all the way to the Orange River mouth at Port Nolloth on the Namibian border, is 2,200 kilometers. This sort of river basin is also very important from a point of view of arable land. 76% of that basin is under cultivation. We did some work on the Krishna River, and it was fascinating to walk this large river and see how much crop growing, rice, corn, nuts, and it's worked continuously 365 days of the year. It also has 13 large hydroelectric dam schemes along the river, not unlike our, the situation with our big dams down the Vaal and Orange River, the Gariep dam, and then the new dams that are being built up in Lesotho. This is a sort of sketch from the Valley of Diamonds, from the tales of Sinbad the Sailor and the Arabian Nights, 18th century Persian book. Some of you, I'm sure, have read it, showing the serpents in these alluvial deposits and old mines that looked after or preserved the diamonds and made it quite difficult to extract. And then this was a more modern diamond mine, alluvial diamond mine on the Krishna River in 1885, very near to a town, a modern town on the Krishna River. We actually walked a lot of this area where this original little mine would be. We couldn't really find any of the relics, but we did find pieces of gravel and remnants of the clasts or rounded boulders that would have been worked at that mine back in 1885, 1900. The Golconda Fort, fascinating building again. It's Golconda in Telugu, the local language, means Shepherd's Hill. There's a fortified citadel and the early capital city of Qutb Shah dynasty in 1512 to 1687. And it's mostly fallen down, but the buildings that do survive and the manner in which they were built is fascinating. It became an important trading center, as it says here, because of the vicinity of the Krishna River diamond mines, especially the Kalua mine, which is a famous one. Golconda flourished as a trade center for the large and famous Golconda diamonds. And some of those big diamonds that I referred to in the previous slide came from here. There's a very interesting diamond. It's the Darya Noor in the Iranian crown jewels, and a very crudely fashioned rectangular cut, sort of a blue-white diamond. Fascinating. So that was the group of us visiting Golconda Fort outside Hyderabad. This is Dr. Babu, a well-known and quite famous Indian geologist who specialized in diamonds. Mike Scott, founder of MSA here in South Africa, who was he and I were sort of offering or providing service to the Indians and an Australian company. Mark Small, a lovely New Zealander who worked with us and did a lot of the field work. He sadly died of cancer some years ago. Okay, if we go to Majgawan, this is the small intrusive diamond pipe, an age of 1,042 million years. It's about the same age as our premier diamond mine and other kimberlites that we find in this country. Its size is very small. Its grade is also rather low, so it's probably at best sub-economic, maybe economic. The diamonds that come out of here are not bad. It's an olivine lamproite, just for the pundits. We in South Africa typically have what we call Group 1 kimberlites, and we also have micaceous kimberlites, which would be similar or equivalent to the olivine lamproites. The lamproite terminology comes out of Australia. This is a piece of that rock, and you'll see the brownish, brown color is caused by the brown red phlogopite mica. And just a little cartoon on the right-hand side, if you can see it. This is a model of kimberlite or lamproite pipes. They're old, ancient volcanoes. Those that carry diamonds to the surface would have started their journey from the mantle at about 150 kilometers plus, which is equivalent to 50 kilobars down below us. Diamonds form in the diamond stability field at greater than 50 kilobars and 1200 degrees centigrade. And these ancient pipes or volcanoes are just the passenger trains that bring diamonds from down below in the Earth's mantle to the surface. And you can see here just a schematic showing a kimberlite pipe with lots of glittering diamonds in it. And obviously it's been prospected and it's about to be mined. And interestingly, around this pipe, given at least 1,200 or 2,000 or 1,000 years of erosion, there's a very interesting conglomerate. It's a very hard silicified conglomerate, and it's worked mostly by women and mined to recover diamonds. So these alluvial deposits are associated with the Pannar lamprite. This situation applies in many kimberlites and lamprites, the Argyle diamond mine in Australia. Also a 1,200 million year old lamprite. It was the world's richest diamond mine at one, or not richest, but biggest producer of diamonds from one mine, 40 million carats per annum. You find a very similar situation. And these women dig away at this. It's a very silicified, very hard. They dig away at it. They use old, and I don't have a picture here, old gas cylinders, which they've cut in half, and a piece of old axle or metal to basically bash up and grind these pieces of hard gravel with diamonds sitting in them. And then they wash that material in a pothole like you can see here. And you use that basket, or particularly a flat basket with a sieve through the bottom, and you jig that. And in that jigging action, you once you get experience at it, your heavy minerals, including diamond or ilmenite or anything else that's heavy, concentrates in the middle. And it's that middle section that you would then, look for the coarse or the heavy concentrate, including diamond, and pick them up by hand. Okay, this is the Riper area. This is now going down further south of Pannar. I think I did show you a map here. Yeah, so we've just been looking at Pannar and the alluvial deposits around Pannar. See that the gemstones out of there never really that big. I think the largest recorded diamond is about 30 carats compared to the very large diamonds that have come out of the Krishna River. Anyway, from there we just dropped down to Riper, and we're going to look at some of the prospecting activities that we conducted there. So back in the early 2000s, the Indians put out, I think there were 10 blocks of ground, which had an indication of diamonds having been recovered from within the blocks in the past. A consortium made up of an Indian diamantaire group, Bharat Shah and Company, Bharat Shah and Company, and an Australian junior basically got together and put in a bid for Block 7. A couple of us, including Mike Scott and myself, had looked at these blocks and given them some advice. This one looked to be the most prospective. It actually had a number of known kimberlites. This here, Beredi, Kodamali, Jangra, and Palikant. These 4 kimberlites were known, and we were quite confident that we'd find more. So they made a bid for this. They were successful, and over the next couple of years, we worked on exploring this block and looking for kimberlites, and we did find a number of kimberlites. Almost certainly this Beredi should have been a small mine. There was another kimberlite we found north of that probably could have added to that. Not big, but certainly positive in terms of having diamonds and reasonable diamonds. Unfortunately, this program and project got killed by politics and the bureaucracy, which, if we think it's bad in South Africa, it's even worse there. This area was originally part of the very large, big central state of Madhya Pradesh. And Madhya Pradesh became, or it's along the way, it's been split up into a couple of, or 3 states, I think. And this area became known as Chhattisgarh. And when this split was made, you had a whole new bureaucracy set up for Chhattisgarh, a new minister of the state. And he was quite a tough guy and somewhat corrupt, and he effectively, for various reasons, almost put a stop to this project. So we eventually, and the Indian diamantaire, in spite of all his efforts to keep the business going and keep the exploration going, you eventually had to walk away. So this project still sits out there. Anyway, so we had an exploration program. We worked in this white area here is a big elevated block of sandstone, a very pretty part of the world that also has a tiger reserve in the area as well. We obviously weren't allowed to work in that tiger reserve, but we walked all around it, and you'll see on the top right hand side, excuse me, Mark Small with some of our Indian geologists collecting samples in the field, or in this case in the forest, but this wasn't in the forest where the tigers were. And this plant, this jig plant or Pleit's jig plant, was constructed to test kimberlite samples, and we did do some testing. Very interestingly, this plant was copied in South Africa, as I've said, and made in India. Along the way, we brought out a very decent and a very smart Indian engineer who did steel fabrication, and he came out and looked at how we make them in South Africa. He went back to India, and in about 6 months, he manufactured, or they manufactured this plant from beginning to end, probably at a fraction of the cost that we would do in South Africa. So that plant, unfortunately, still sits there to this day, and hopefully one day it might get used. Those of us on the project, whenever I traveled there, we actually lived in this little town. I go back, sorry, pardon. Go back to this map. We lived in the little town of Mindpur. Here, there, you can see where the blue circle is, Mindpur, a little village. There was a bigger town, it's not showing on this, to the left here again, called Raipur, which was sort of in fact, I think that became the capital of Chhattisgarh. Anyway, we lived in the village, and it was a wonderful experience. The people couldn't be nicer. You can see they still use oxen to cart stuff from the fields or to pump water, and we had wonderful Indian food. The spices and the cooking was really exceptional. The project also went ahead and built housing for the local people. The principal, the Indian Diamantaire, who effectively sponsored this project, was quite positive that it would go ahead. Part of the deal was that, you built some infrastructure for the people that we were either using in the field or in the laboratory. We trained young lab assistants, picture here on the right-hand side, and those young girls picked up the expertise or the sort of processes needed in no time. Very, very industrious, hardworking, and smart, and all well educated. So it was a really fun project to be in. And staying here, living in the village, was, as I say, fascinating. So that's a bit of the country out in India. Working out there was a lot of fun, and I'm going to keep going given time. We walked a lot in the fields and in the countryside. It was always fascinating to encounter people, these rural people living in the small villages. All of those little villages had a school. The kids back then, it was mostly the male children who would be educated. Not long afterwards, they changed the law in India. Most people will know that girls were almost not educated. But anyway, that changed, and girls now also get a decent education. But we would walk through a village, and you'd always encounter the school, and the headmaster would come out and see you, and then some of the kids would follow. When they heard you had a South African accent, they typically would start talking cricket. And at that time, people like John T. Rhodes and Hansi Cronje were still, excuse me, in our mix of cricket. And so you would spend the next half hour or so talking to these kids and the headmaster about cricket, and then you'd carry on walking, and you'd find the parents working in rice paddy fields or sort of tendering crops. Okay, let's go from there back to Mumbai. So this is Mumbai. big West Coast city, 21 million people and growing. It's, as I said, the economic and business center of the country. And of course, many of you know or not know that it's the heart of the Bollywood film industry. And I'm sure some of you will have watched some of these films. Taj Mahal Hotel, we were quite privileged when we arrived in India and Mumbai. We would typically stay there for a night or two, meet the principal, Bharat Shah, who had a diamond business and factory in Mumbai. The amenities and the swimming pool were first class. And in fact, when we went to, Marilyn and I went to the wedding, we also stayed in this hotel. So this is the capital of the international diamond industry. As I said, about 92% of the world's rough diamonds are bought, cut and polished and resold by Indian family businesses. Quite fascinating, COVID-19 shut down India in late March 2020. It effectively collapsed the world diamond business, where suddenly people couldn't travel. The one thing that the Indian diamantaires do, and they make a great effort, they like to see the diamonds they buy. I'm talking rough diamonds, not cut and polished. So they, for example, I guess have driven, some of you will have heard about the site system. So if Botswana sells diamonds at 10 sites per annum, they mined last year about 35 million carats of diamonds. They're the world's second biggest producer after Russia. And at those 10 sites, at those 10 sales events or sites, the Indian diamantaires who buy those goods will always make a point of going to see firsthand, what they are buying. Typically, they will know that they get a certain assortment. Some of them buy bigger goods, some of them buy the very small, tiny goods, the melee. But the process for the site holders and all of these people that travel to see these sites is sort of a key part of the business. So shock horror when COVID came along and the whole world shut down, including India in March, 2021? Oh, sorry, 2020. The diamond business almost collapsed. Credit to the Indian diamantaires and all the big producers like Botswana and Russia. They kept diamonds sort of in their vaults for several months. And very interestingly, we also saw a lot of technology platforms coming to the fore to actually allow parcels of rough diamond to be sold from a distance. That's for another discussion, but COVID actually did the diamond market some good as well. Anyway, the business did recover. This business going back 2,000 years has outlasted a recession, world recession, 2 world wars, the global financial crash, and of course now COVID. So it's proved to be very resilient over that 2,000 years of activity. We saw a big kick up in prices and activity in the middle of, or sort of from the middle of 2021. Diamond prices in the first half of last year were also very strong, and then they sort of flattened off in the latter part of last year, and they're a bit flat now as we speak, but they'll pick up again. This is a typical diamond factory. These are polishing wheels where diamonds are being polished and finished. This is the sort of very traditional approach, and you'll find this in many of these large buildings in Mumbai and up in Surat, further to the northwest. So as I said, India dominates the rough market and then cuts and polish those diamonds. So the polish market they dominate is 60% share by value, 80% by volume, and 92% by quality of stone. So every 8 out of 10 polished stones will be polished to an exceptional quality. These people take immense pride in the work that they do, and you're seeing more and more women in it as well. And as I said early on, primarily Jainists and dominantly family businesses. The big trend in diamonds has been, again, technology. Cutting and polishing today is being driven by technology with increased efficiency, lower holding costs. Typically, cutting and polishing diamonds the traditional way takes time. The diamond gets cut, it gets inspected, it goes through a pipeline of checks and balances and certification, which is quite slow nowadays. And this is just a very quick rundown. There's some wonderful technology, Serene, being developed by the Indians. It's effectively image analysis studies of a diamond. It's not much different to a CAT scan. So you stick a diamond into a image analysis. It's a very sophisticated microscope. I'm sure some of you that teach geology will know what I'm talking about. And and they can do it for small stones, but it works obviously best in bigger stones, sort of 2 carats and bigger. So you analyze that diamond, and you can map out every single gletz or spot or imperfection or black inclusion in that diamond in 3D space, and you record that in a database. Then the program is called Galaxy, will process this data and tell you how many super clean stones or partly clean stones you can cut out of that single diamond. And in this case, on the right-hand side, you'll see these different colors, the red and the green and the blue, which are a model showing how many, maybe 1 carat or 2 carat stones you can cut out of that one single stone. From there, if you're happy, or you might decide to, take it a step further and only cut, if it's a sort of D flawless diamond, you want the top quality stone, you'll sort of take that a step further and only cut out the exceptionally clean, no inclusion, DIF, top color D, internally flawless diamond, whatever you choose. From here, that diamond will go across to the left-hand side of the diagram into these laser cutter systems. And then the technology or the mapping that you've done of that diamond on the right-hand side in the Serene and Galaxy process will be taken over to the laser cutter, and that laser cutter will cut the diamond almost to perfection. There might still be some final polishing on a lap by a master craftsman, but these gents sitting here at these blue vacuum chambers are effectively managing the laser cutting process. And the gentlemen behind here at the bench are actually then inspecting the quality of the laser cuts and deciding how the finishing will be done. So technology has played a huge role in the development of this industry. And very interestingly, in the Indian culture, many of these young people, or not so young people, will actually start learning their business as kids. So, there's this big argument in the world about child labor. So if you go to an Indian factory, particularly in Surat, you may well see kids, young people, not children, but kids, probably junior school level, running around the factory and doing something in the factory. They'll go to school in the morning, in the afternoon they'll work in the factory, their parents' factory. So they start life very early on having a trade. Not all of them end up staying there, but by the time those guys or young people have finished their training, they'll be going straight into a job. So they will have a job, whether they stay there or whatever is obviously their choice. So it really is a model that works well. And with the advance of technology, and I'm nearly finished, with the advance of technology, these people just keep moving up the chain. They don't get put on the street. There's always a use for them in the next stage of the business. One very important comparison down here is the cost of manufacturing. To cut a 1 carat quality stone in India to a top cut is $10 a carat. In Belgium, because of labor costs, 70. In South Africa, it's about $120 a carat to cut the same diamond. And it just shows the efficiency and the artisanship and the labor costs that you have in India. And for many people like South Africa, when it comes to beneficiation, you can't compete. And that's why India dominates the market. Okay, let's move on to India and go and look at the fun part. So you stay in a fancy hotel there, and this is where your laundry goes. So just take note when you go to the local laundromat. This is it. So this is the express laundry, super fast, and it's Gansai Yamda's laundry system. And take note of the modernization, unlike the diamond business. This gent on the right is, washing your sheets, and he's giving them a good pound with his feet and taking great pride in how he does it. Okay, this is fresh food delivery, and this happened long before Uber Eats. Super efficient service with pride and precision. There's no maps, GPS, smartphones, laptops, and computers. So these are the double wallahs, and it's a sight to behold. So you go off to work in the morning with your briefcase, early morning, your cooked meal arrives. If you want it there at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in your office, it'll get there regardless, and kept hot in these sort of insulated tins. It really, as I say, is a sight to behold. Transport and travel in India, again, another experience. And this just shows some sites around Mumbai. And with the development and the growth of their middle class, the number of cars on the roads in India is becoming astronomical. You can see the numbers there for yourself. And part of the reason why they've also embarked on a big highway development scheme as well across India, but just too many people. And all these little yellow roofs and cars you see how either the tuk-tuks or the taxis. Other transport means, you still see this in India, where we certainly did back then. These elephants were taking people between towns on the road to Jaipur. Out in the field, we used the tuk-tuk. You'd get to the end of a traverse, you wouldn't feel like walking back to your starting point. And so you'd commandeer a local tuk-tuk and get a lift back to either home base or the village you were staying in. And you see camels quite regularly, maybe less so today, up in the sort of drier northwest parts of India. This was the wedding. We won't bore you with too much, but we went to a wonderful wedding of the marriage of the Parikh family. I think it was their daughter. A big diamante business, very successful. Offices in Mumbai, obviously a factory. Office in Dubai, and a big setup in Antwerp to one of the Mittal families. Now the Mittals, you'll know, are very famous in the iron and steel business. Anyway, it was a week-long affair, several ceremonies. We attended the last 5 days. We had been requested to send the sizes or our measurements, and when we got to Mumbai before the wedding, our clothes were all neatly made out, different clothes of different events in the hotel room for us. Okay, so there's yours truly and Marilyn going to the different functions that we went to. This was the henna party. This was the bride and the groom and the groom's mother, lovely people. Marilyn will tell you at this ceremony, I think there were several hundred people. These guys had all been obviously well briefed, and they came across to us and said, good morning or good evening, Dr. and Mrs. Bristow, how are you? So really, the Indians really go about, I guess it goes with their business culture and looking after their partners and service with a smile. So this is Marilyn being decorated in the henna party. And then this was the final wedding ceremony. This was at the Royal Western India Turf Club in Mumbai, quite a place. It has a history spanning 2 centuries. Like cricket, horse racing is a legacy of the British Raj. So that's where we ended up for the final supper and celebration, and they really laid it on. This was the tables. Notice the King Proteas, South African Proteas down the middle. We had bands and recitals all evening long, and it really was a wonderful experience. Weddings with the difference, just to show you, the extent to which Indian people go. This was the marriage of Vanisha Mittal, daughter of India's then second richest man, Lakshmi Mittal. I think some of you will have heard of him. It was in France. The cost was $60 million. 1,000 guests were flown to France from all over the world. And just compare that to the poor royals who only spent 48 million back in the days of Charles and Diana when they got married, which is about, I guess, 110 million today in today's money. Just the last slide. I think again, many of you have read the history of India. There's some fascinating books if anyone's interested, and happy to pass them on. The end of the British Raj, 1848 to 1947, the partition. It was a very traumatic period of history in Indian history, where effectively, people that had lived together for centuries were now sort of pushed apart or forced apart, and you had the Indians left in India, and you had the Pakistanis sort of pushed over into Pakistan, and the consequences of that, I guess, still sort of reverberate today as well. And so that's just a bit of that that history. There's some very good books, as I say, and we're happy to pass them on. And then just to end, this is my take on India. Just the experience, the true meaning of life, living, color, vibrancy, class, and caste, being poor, poverty, and it carries on. The one fascinating thing that I found in India, wherever you went, you might get sort of overwhelmed by people numbers, but you never felt threatened. And very interestingly, in the Hindu religion and culture, in poor people or caste people, not that they sort of really have a say anyway, will respect what you have. So, if you're rich, and some people, these diamantes are super rich, or people like us, white skins, privileged, when you walked around, they would be fascinating by you, particularly if you were white. Marilyn, was stopped at the at Agra and asked to have a photo taken with Indian people because she was white and she had a very colorful dress on. But and I walked occasionally between hotels at night. The street kids who sleep on the islands in the road would sort of come and look at you again because you were a bit different, but you never at any stage felt threatened. And I walked in some of the slums, normally with someone, but at no stage, did you feel that your life was in danger or someone was going to throw a rock at you or cause you harm. So that's really it. Gandhi, of course, famous character. He was here in South Africa for quite a long period. I've always found his 7 deadly sins quite fascinating, particularly his comment, and I think it sums up politicians very well: politics without principle. And I think sadly today, that's what so many of our politicians don't follow. And then, never forget, and Einstein noted that if it weren't for the Indians, we wouldn't have bats. So that's my take on India. As I say, been very fortunate. Happy to share more of this. You're welcome to the presentation, and lots of interesting books I can pass on to you or refer you to. Thank you. And those are just acknowledgements and some quite interesting YouTubes on the history of India and on cutting and polishing diamonds. Thanks very much. Okay, back to you, Gillian. Sorry, it was a bit long.
Oh, thank you very much for that wonderful talk, John. That was truly fascinating. It takes a lot to sit riveted for almost an hour and a half without drifting off, but you certainly achieved that for me. Gordon, would you like to take over from here? Or I see John McNulty has managed to battle his way through the horrendous stalled. So, John, perhaps you would like to, John McNulty, would you like to take the questions?
Right. Sorry, I'm just as you say. Sorry, I'm late joining. I've been on route south. Thank you, John. That was amazing. Actually, I've never been to India, but I have to say, I'm intrigued by the comments at the end about what you wouldn't understand until you travel there.
Yeah.
I'll invite questions on the chat function if anybody wants to ask any questions there, and field them to John. But thank you very much. There was a lot in that, and it's very interesting for us because we had a lecture in this series. We've had a lecture, obviously, on diamonds specifically, which so it's very interesting to have the background to that in looking again at the aspect in India as well.
Okay, you haven't lived if you haven't been to India, so make a plan. And there's some fascinating lips there as well, as you know, Gillian.
I think it's definitely one for my bucket list, isn't it?
Good.
Right. Anybody, any questions? Just if anybody wants to field their questions on the chat function, if you understand how that works, I'll just give people a minute or two to see if anybody's got any questions there.
While people are coordinating their questions, maybe I could kick off by asking John to say something about the relationship of De Beers and the Indian diamond industry.
Yeah. So the diamond industry is fascinating. It used to be dominated by De Beers, and it's been, and I guess in the early days, one of the big problems in the industry, Gillian, was the lack of transparency, and De Beers were very much at fault. I mean, they at that, in the 60s and 70s and 80s, they controlled most of the world's production, particularly gemstones. Even then, the diamonds were mostly cut and polished in India, and not many people knew much about it. Anyway, the Canadian deposits that were discovered in '91 made a big difference to that, because, as you know, the Canadians and their junior companies, when they find a diamond, they want to move the share price. So suddenly the world changed for diamonds, and transparency became a big thing. But over the years, De Beers did also culture, strong ties with the Indians. In fact, when we flew, Marilyn and I flew to India in 2005, Nikki and Strilly Oppenheimer were sitting in the front of the plane. So, that was, they knew all the big diamantaires, and they were, part of the Indian family, so to speak. I think the realization for De Beers is that India was a key partner, in fact, and a big risk, as COVID showed, when India shut down, the market shut down. But the other big turning point was also, fascinatingly, when the Argyle diamond mine was discovered by the Australians, ironically, or Australian Prospecting Group, a small company. There was a lady, Maureen Muggeridge, who drove that process, lovely girl. They found the Argyle deposit in the Kimberley block up in the northwest in 1981, much to the shock and horror of De Beers. We knew it all, and no one was ever going to find a big diamond mine anywhere else. Anyway, that diamond mine produced 40 million carats, as I said, in its peak production by 1990. The world production at that time was 160 million carats of rough diamonds. So they produced 25%. Those goods looked like road metal. They averaged, and I'm sorry I'm laboring the point, but it just goes to show what could be done. Those diamonds were worth, what we talk about run of mine, is, you'll all know, there's no price today in the marketplace for a rough diamond. Each diamond is different. Those diamonds, the run of mine production, as we call it, averaged $9 a carat. It was absolute junk. But in there were some gorgeous pink stones. And if any of you, have money to invest in diamonds for a future date, or for a girlfriend or fiance or wife, buy the colored stones, the real colored stones. So today, the pinks, cut and polished pinks and reds out of Argyle are selling at like $2 and $3 million per carat. They are just exceptional. So it's 0.2 of a gram. Anyway, so when that mine was discovered, and this absolute junk, it took De Beers and the Indian cutters and polishers and Argyle Diamonds, the name of the company then, they got their heads together, because immediately the big concern is that large production would flood the market. And it was really due to that sort of tripartite group of people who put their heads together, and it was largely due to these cutting and polishing families in Surat. And back then it was all done, by hand and wheel and a hand lens or a microscope. The Surat cutters and polishers and family businesses were able to take the very poor quality goods that came out of Argyle, and they would cut a 1-pointer or a 2-pointer. And back then they put most diamonds today have 32 facets on them. They would put slightly fewer facets. I think it was 24, but they would cut that diamond it might be a 1-pointer, it might be a 2-pointer or 5-pointer, these incredibly small diamonds, and then they got set in jewelry. So back in the late 80s and the early 90s, you could buy a diamond pendant, a set of earrings, and a ring for $20. In the States, it was $1990, and suddenly you could afford a piece of diamond jewelry. And it's been fascinating if you go back and look at the history of that period and the marketing, and that's where De Beers came in. They started marketing, counter to sort of their normal business, these cheap diamond jewelry for $20 a shot. And suddenly, particularly in the States, millions of people could afford a diamond that they would have not normally been able to afford. But as those people went up the curve, particularly the baby boomers and the people who got wealthier and paid for their house and got rid of the mortgage, they started to then buy real bigger diamonds. So it became a very important part of the diamond business. So you could go from buying a cheap diamond, later on in life, with eternity rings and that, you could afford a bigger one. So there, I think De Beers and the Indians really became a lot closer, and man, they did an amazing job selling all those goods. And the diamond industries never looked back. And to finish, we're seeing the same thing today with synthetic diamonds. So nowadays you can make diamonds very easily, not difficult. You just emulate what goes on in the mantle, heat and pressure. So you can make synthetic diamonds, you grow them in wafers, and then you cut and polish whatever you want out of it. So that's also becoming a big business. And again, to me, it's positive for the market. It's brandable. It's the sort of stuff young people are buying. Chinese love it. And again, you'll see that same trend of then buying up value as you grow wealth in your future.
Thanks. I mean, moving on to it's interesting because you mentioned about the supply there, obviously with synthetic diamonds as well. Because Gordon Liddell, who's a member, is asking, is there any evidence of a decline in the diamond resource?
Yeah. We have a problem, so to speak, in natural diamonds. So last year in COVID in 2021, production was 117 million carats of rough. Last year it was kicked up about 130, down from that peak of 160. And we haven't seen a new world-class diamond mine discovery since 1991, the Canadian discoveries. So you're absolutely right. There's a lot of concern, and I'm of course a traditionalist. We've got to find some more natural diamonds. So we need a big world-class mine. But it costs a lot of money. It really is a needle in a haystack type business, and we haven't seen. Carry on.
So are people searching for these extra resources? I mean, is that something that De Beers or whoever invests in, or with the help of geologists?
Well, even De Beers for the last 10, 15 years haven't done much exploration. BHP went away. They no longer do diamonds. Rio Tinto, interestingly, is back in the business. And we do see, quite a number of junior players. But encouragingly, last year, we saw De Beers and Rio Tinto go back into Angola. Angola, we think, is still very prospective. A lot of it's covered by sand. We're seeing more activity in Botswana. Canada's probably been flogged to death. They've had, and they've mined a lot of very rich small kimberlites, but those kimberlites, 3 to 5 hectares, are all at the end of their lives. And one of the key things is that Botswana has the world's richest diamond mine. It's called Jwaneng in southern Botswana. It's at surface, it was about 54. That's Premier. It was about 70 hectares, and then the Arapa diamond mine, when they found it, was 110 hectares. It's just a massive ore body. So those two mines will go for a long time yet, although Jwaneng has to go underground in the next few years, and that sort of doubles your costs and halves your production. Yeah.
I have another question from Anne Watkins, who's asking, the Deccan volcanics terminated diamonds. Could you say how? Did they just cover the kimberlite pipes?
No, well, it's very interesting. India is fascinating, and it's something we started to discuss with Gillian. Most of the known kimberlites that have some diamonds, and we're pretty confident that it's those kimberlites that produced the big diamonds in the Krishna River, are typically 1,200 million years old. So they're much older than the Deccan. But and those diamonds were brought to surface a long time ago, and then they were spread down the big rivers, and a lot of that Deccan plateau 65 million years ago has obviously now been weathered off by modern weathering, and it may have previously covered some of those kimberlites, but most of them are exposed. But if you look at and that's a discussion for us to have with Gillian and Bruce, and that we think that the skating process whereby India took off at like a Ferrari motor car across the Indian Ocean might have delaminated that cratonic keel, because many of these old cratons, the way we look at cratons, they have a very stable keel locked on the bottom of what we call, depleted lithosphere. And that's why probably the lips have a role to play, because that extraction of basalt leaves behind a depleted peritic lithosphere, and that's where the diamonds get formed and preserved. I mean, we've been able to date diamonds with modern technology, looking at the inclusions in diamonds back to 3.2 billion years. So they've been locked in it's like an iceberg. And, that's how we geologists look at it, the lithospheric keel. And it's a very stable, coherent part of the mantle or upper mantle, and it relocates or translates across, when the continents wander around with that continent. So we think there was a diamondiferous keel under India back in, the Proterozoic, 1,200 million years, but we also know there are young kimberlites there, and we haven't seen a lot of diamonds in those young kimberlites. And we see it again on the Wyoming Craton, for example. The Wyoming Craton has kimberlites. It has some kimberlites on the eastern edge state line with diamonds. But the kimberlites in the Wyoming Craton don't have any diamonds. And again, I think there's enough evidence, heat flow in that suggests that the original keel, the Archean keel under Wyoming Craton has also, been eroded away. But it's a very interesting topic you raised.
Oh, well, I was going to say Anne Watkins, a member who's placed that question. There's a question now from Liz Kersop, saying, sounds like corruption and bureaucracy are big obstacles to Indian gem mining. Does it also affect the trading of finished gems?
It's the bureaucracy clearly slowed down or stopped mining in the field, and I think it's a good question again. Part of that problem is that the Indians have been traders. They're very good at doing a turn now. I mean, they'll cut and polish a diamond and sell it in 2 months' time, for a buck or $100, depending on the price. That they don't have a long-term view, what you need to be if you're an explorer and a diamond miner. The diamond industry in this country has been ongoing for 150 years, and it takes a lot of capital investment, a lot of time and patience. It's not something that's sort of typical of the Indian culture. They traders. They make a buck, in a day or a couple of days, and so explaining to an Indian bureaucrat that if I'm going to, invest and develop and build a diamond mine, it's going to take me, years, not weeks and months. And it's the same problem. As I said, Rio Tinto found a really nice, actually, lamprites, group of lamprites called the Bunda pipes, quite close to Pannar. But man, they eventually walked away, and those pipes are still sitting there.
Gosh. I have another question, so I'm going to invite B. Williamson to unmute themselves and ask the question.
Oh, hi, good day. Thanks a lot,
Bruce.
John. My limited knowledge of I guess, diamond operations more in our neck of the woods is the actual physical security of diamonds is a big issue.
Yeah.
Just looking at some of those cutting centers, etc., and you describing the people. I mean, what sort of security is needed around that vast amount of diamonds passing through there?
Yeah, Bruce, it's a good question. I mean, I think the Indians, those ordinary people, and as I said, in the Hindu sort of culture, theft, as I said, if you walk down the street there, no one ever came over, and stole your purse or wallet. And I think that culture runs through that society. But yeah, and there, there's a lot of CCTV cameras. Every parcel that's handed out in the morning or put away in the afternoon, is weighed and reconciled. So the checks and balances are pretty tough. And man, I mean, those guys, when you spend your life looking at a diamond, you and I would look at a parcel and say, well, that's all the same. The experts, that they obviously not in the little stones, Bruce, but if it's a bigger stone, where the value would lie. I mean, to steal those, fine chips, you've got to almost steal, a suitcase of them to achieve much value.
Yeah,
the value really comes when you set it in jewelry or in pave or somewhere. But when it gets to bigger stones, those diamantaires know their diamonds, man. If they think there's a stone missing from a parcel that they've inspected or has been cut and polished, they pick it up very quickly.
Yeah. Okay, just another one. Can you remind us, sort of more recent numbers, what sort of level of carats and by value are actually bought and within India itself? So what sort of percentage of the demand do they account for?
Well, Bruce, they don't really produce anything. So
no, in terms of consumption, in terms of physically buying.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, only now, more recently, probably in the last 10 years, are Indians starting to also wear diamond as adornment. It's very interesting. Their wedding processes, it was always about having gold jewelry. And man, you go to an Indian wedding, and I don't think I pointed it out, but the young girl that got married in the wedding we went to, the gold jewelry and gold adornment was fantastic. But even though they were a diamantaire family, there were some, but you didn't see a lot of diamonds. And that was traditional. Precious stones are much more common. You'll see women wearing gold with precious stones, but as I say, it's only really probably in the last 10, 15 years. And remember, I think it was when we were there, working there in the 2000s. I mean, at one stage, advertising was not allowed in India. You never got billboards advertising diamonds. The gold jewelry was a traditional thing, but it has changed, Bruce. And you do see, particularly at upmarket weddings, more and more people also wearing diamond jewelry. But that market is still small. The world's biggest market for retail diamond jewelry, as you know, is India. The US, and then China, and then probably countries in the UAE. India,
Okay.
from a buying and wearing in diamond jewelry is still quite small. But I'll get the figures for you.
Okay, great. Thanks for that.
Thank you. It's approaching 9:15, so I think it's probably time to say thank you very much indeed for an illuminating discussion about the diamond industry, but actually about India along the way. There's a lot of history in there, and it reminds me,
amazing history.
On a personal note, I need to go and read up on it. But I'd like to thank you again for taking the time to speak to us. I don't know whether Gillian, who I know has arranged the invitation, wants to say a final word.
Well, just to reiterate what John McNulty just said, and thank you very much indeed, John. That was extremely enjoyable. And well, what more can I say? Thank you very much.
Okay. I'll catch up with you at the weekend, Gillian, and hopefully we'll see you again one of these days, and some of your colleagues. And if anyone gets the chance to go to India, it's good fun.
That's the plan, John.
Yeah. Okay. And thanks, everyone.
I would remind everybody that we've recorded this, so it will be available on our YouTube channel.
Okay.
Bye for now.
As I say, you're welcome to circulate that presentation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, John.